Hello everybody, my name is Andrea Bönsch, and today I will talk about how we can objectively measure perceived social presence in interactions with embodied conversational agents. In this work, we propose and evaluate a paradigm called heard text recall, or short HTR, as a performance-based proxy for social presence. I will briefly introduce the concept, explain our experimental setup with multimodal degradations, and highlight the key findings and design implications for future agent systems. Before I introduce the HTR paradigm in detail, let me first briefly revisit what we mean by social presence and how it is typically measured in agent research. We follow the notion of Bioka and colleagues, who describe social presence as the feeling of being in the presence of another human being and having access to their intentional, cognitive, and affective state. When an agent behaves in a human-like and responsive way, people report higher social presence, which prior work links to greater trust, enjoyment, satisfaction, and better training outcomes. However, measuring social presence reliably remains challenging. Traditionally, we rely on subjective questionnaires. Over 40 different ones exist, but they all suffer from response biases and often confuse participants after agent exposure, thus limiting sensitivity. For example, try to answer this question here. I perceive the person as only a computerized image, not a real person. And you will quickly see that it is not as easy as you might think on a first glance. Researchers thus proposed objective alternatives like proxemics or gaze behavior, but so far none has replaced questionnaire-based metrics. This gap motivated us to test the standardized heard text recall paradigm as a performance-based proxy. The HTR is a standardized task from psychology, originally to evaluate listening effort and short-term memory in conversations. In our implementation, two agents narrate short family stories under different conditions. Post-exposure, participants answer questions, evaluating their performance in recalling of what was said. Extending the HTR to a dual task paradigm supports us furthermore in measuring cognitive spare capacity. So, while listening to the stories, participants have to react to periodic vibrational patterns from controllers, as now shown on the slide. The core idea here is that unexpected agent behavior, like, for example, degraded modalities, bind cognitive resources and thus reduce vibration response accuracy. So we hypothesize that higher social presence should preserve spare capacity and boosts memory. These considerations lead to our two core research questions for this presentation. First, can HTR serve as an indirect objective proxy for social presence, potentially complementing or even replacing subjective questionnaires? And to test this, we secondly ask, how do systematic multimodal degradations like reduced animations, speech distortion, or timing delays affect HTR recall and vibration response, as well as social presence? Now let's take a look at our methodology. First, we need to meaningfully design the agent's co-verbal behavior. Therefore, we used our previous research on turn-taking behavior. The gaze behavior for each conversational act, here visualized as acoustic wave, is structured as follows. During the utterance, we have equally distributed gaze. Close to the end and during the gap, if we have mutual gaze, then the agent should break it if he wants to hold the turn, as shown here, or hold it if the turn should be yielded. Besides gazing behavior, the gesture behavior is also important as turn-taking cue in this gap situation. In case the turn is hold, the agents also hold the gesture to continue gesturing when talking again. And if the turn is yielded, the agent finished his gestures, returning to an idle or listening pose. Additionally, we added an audible breathing before starting any utterance. For the co-verbal gestures, we built our own mocap plugin based on off-the-shelf VR hardware. The resulting motion capture pipeline contains some artifacts in the raw data, so we had to clean them. First, we added a filter smoothing position and orientation using a moving window, as well as a peak removal algorithm detecting and removing outliers. Combining both, we then got an improved gesturing. As we also wanted to test degraded gestures, we overdid the parameters of the aforementioned filter to reduce quality, and also added time-shifted versions of the gestures. We then conducted a VR-based study with 33 participants, where each participant always saw 2 versions of the 8 gesture degraders for the same sentence side by side. They had to decide which one is more natural, moving the lever, as shown in the graphics. Our results indicate that the improved gestures were indeed rated very well, while the overall peak removal was perceived as worse. With this, we have all the ingredients for our main user study to evaluate whether multimodal degraders in agents influence the dual task outcome. Thus, we deliberately degraded the agent's performance. Firstly, we used only the overall peak removal gestures as bad gesture condition with human recorded speech and turn-taking gestures. And here you can see a small snippet of the result.
Diana und Magda kleiden sich dann immer identisch, sodass sie nicht unterscheiden kann.
Das finden auch ihr Vater Roland und ihre Mutter Alexandra lustig.
Secondly, we used no gestures at all. As third degrader, the turn-taking cues are presented at the wrong points in time. So, for example, holding a gesture, also the turn changes to the other speaker. We also added 2 severe degradations. First, using a synthetic text-to-speech voice.
Sein Wunsch ist es, dass Bruno später seinen Bildhauerbetrieb übernimmt. Die nötige Geduld und Geschicklichkeit hat er dafür.
And omitting lip movements altogether.
Torstens jüngere Schwester Ariel hat vor einem Jahr als Flugbegleiterin bei Lufthansa angefangen.
Sie wollte diese Arbeit nur vorübergehend machen, aber es gefällt ihr ziemlich gut.
Our 6th condition did not use any degraders at all, showing the full capabilities of our embodied conversational agents. We evaluated 2 hypotheses, namely that the degraders indeed reduce social presence and that the measured cognitive spare capacity correlates with these measures. Therefore, we had 30 participants familiarize themselves with the task and the setting, and then had blocks with 3 repetitions each per degrader in counterbalanced order, ending with a post-study questionnaire and some debriefing. Regarding the social presence questionnaires, we found that significant worse scores were apparent for the text-to-speech condition as well as for the missing lip sync, which leads us to partially accepting the first hypothesis. In the primary recall task, we did not find any significant differences, which was presumable. However, in the secondary task, we found similar results to the social presence questionnaires, which leads us to accepting the second hypothesis. However, social presence and secondary task only detected effects for severe degradations. Nevertheless, we think cognitive spare capacity seems to be a meaningful proxy here. So, what should you remember from this presentation? Considering our first research question, HTR is indeed a promising objective proxy for social presence, but not a perfect replacement. In conditions with higher social presence ratings, participants had a higher cognitive spare capacity, resulting in better performance for the secondary task, showing a meaningful correlation between HTR scores and questionnaires. However, HTR does not capture conscious subjective ratings, so we recommend using both metrics together for a richer agent evaluation. Looking at our second research question, we found that some degraders clearly reduce social presence and HTR performance. Others have more subtle or mixed effects. Especially degradations that disrupt core communicative cues, such as intelligibility of speech, naturalness of facial animation, or timings, produce noticeable drops in both scores. Furthermore, multimodal integration matters, but it is not more modalities are better, but coherent, well-synchronized modalities are better, as we saw that poor alignment, for example, in terms of delayed gestures, affects negatively. Thus, we recommend prioritizing robust, intelligible speech and key nonverbal behaviors over high visual fidelity. These takeaways bring me to the end of my presentation, and I thank you all for your interest in our work.